In this episode, I'm going to show you how to start building your own RSI trading strategy. There's a few things you'll need in order to be able to complete this episode. The first thing you'll need is the ability to get candlesticks from Binance. Now, in previous episodes, I show you how to do that. Otherwise, just make sure that you've got a connection to Binance, which allows you to retrieve candlesticks. The second thing you'll need is the ability to calculate your RSI indicator. If you want to know how to do that, in my previous episode, I showed you how to do it using TA-lib, and I really recommend you check it out if it's going to help. Once you can do those two things, let's get into the code. I wanted to talk a little bit about what it is and what it can be used for. I won't be covering everything, and if you want a more detailed review of the RSI indicator, check out my blog post that I've linked in the description below. So the RSI is an indicator that oscillates between 0 and 100. Doesn't matter how much your security happens to range, whether it's Bitcoin, which can go up into the tens of thousands, or you're looking at something simple like the Euro USD, which can just oscillate between 1.01 and up to about 1.04. It will always give you a value between 0 and 100. In classic RSI theory, the values of 30 and 70 are considered to be significant, and we'll be using them to start off with in our trading bot. When a security reaches an RSI value of 70 or more, it's often considered to be overbought, which means that it's likely that the price is going to start trending down in the near future. In a similar manner, if the RSI value reaches a value of 30 or below, it can be considered to be oversold, in which case it's likely that it's going to start trending back up again. I'm sure you can already start to imagine some strategies you could use with these values. Now, I'll be honest, many traders think that the value of 70 and 30 aren't quite accurate. And to be honest, it's likely that every single security has its own sort of values of the RSI that are the most applicable. The cool thing about what we're doing with our trading bot is we're going to start by using the RSI standard values of 70, 30, and a period of 14. But then we're going to use backtesting later on in the series to establish the exact RSI values that apply to whatever security you might choose to use. So follow along as we add the RSI indicator to your trading bot. When it comes to building your own strategies for your trading bots, there's lots of different things that you can do that make your life a little bit easier. As a result, in this episode, I've decided to take a little bit more time explaining how to go about designing your own strategy in the hope that that'll help you to build the most amazing strategies for yourself. The first thing I always do for my strategies is I make sure that they are in their own Python file. And the reason is that just means that it's really, really easy to take any strategy I've designed in the past and apply it to pretty much any symbol I might query from any exchange. As long as the data frame format is the same, we're good to go. So for this one, we've created a file with our RSI strategy, and now we're going to define our RSI _ overbought oversold strategy. And we're going to start, we'll come back to this in a little bit, but initially we're going to start with a data frame variable, an overbought level variable, and an oversold level variable. And using the information that you were just shared with in the previous section of this video, we're going to start with our overbought level and our oversold level of 30 and 70. Now, for those of you who are wondering about the amazing autocomplete that was just flashing on the screen, I've recently been trying GitHub's Copilot just to see how it works, and I've got to be honest, it's quite impressive. If you'd like to hear more about that, just let me know in the comments, and I'll certainly post a review for everyone if you're interested. So, commenting my code, as always, super important. Love letter to your future self. And like I said, the default values are going to be 70 and 30. So let's add those default values in. Now, the reason why I've set them as a default rather than hard coding is later on in the series, I'm going to show you how to use something like backtesting.py to actually find out if they are the best variables. Who knows, there might be something like 85 and 13, and I'll show you how to figure that out using backtesting. But 70 and 30 are kind of like the RSI canonical values, and so that's what we're going to use initially. Okay, updating my comments to make sure that I'm clear about what we're doing. And at the end of this, we're going to return a pandas data frame with all of the values added that we might be calculating. Here's the pseudocode that we always want to work through when it comes to a strategy, just to kind of frame our thinking effectively. The first thing that we're always going to want to do is to make sure that we retrieve the data that we're going to use. Okay, and that's really an opportunity for us to make sure that it's all correctly formatted, it's in the right kind of way of doing things. And for this particular strategy, in contrast to other ways that I've done it in other episodes that I've shown, we're going to provide the strategy with an option to receive either a data frame or go and get its own information, making this particular strategy super flexible and expandable. The next thing we're always going to do is to calculate the indicators that our trading bot uses to make decisions. Okay, and then we want to calculate the crossover events for when it crosses over the 70 or the 30 in the correct direction. Okay, so crossover event for overbought, crossover event for oversold. Then we want to calculate our signals. And ultimately, we're going to return that completed data frame back to our function or back to our strategy. Okay, now I've split this up into a couple of different episodes, and the reason is I really wanted to expand on how to go about building the strategy for yourself. So let me know in the comments if that's helpful for you. So let's talk about retrieving the data frame values. We've given ourselves two different options. Either we just provide it with a raw data frame that has everything that we need, or we want to go and retrieve those values for ourselves. Now, if we're choosing to copy the data, if we're choosing to use the data frame that's given to us, what we actually want to do is to copy it. And the reason for that is if you don't copy it and then you try to modify those values, Python will actually give you a warning, which can be really annoying and quite verbose to work through. So to avoid that, we just copy it to a different thing. Now, if we don't have a data frame, then we want to do something different. Okay, and what we're going to do is we're going to do something called data frame helper functions dot get underscore data. And in the next section, we're going to build that function. So just before we finish that off, we'll import the helper functions. There's a few things that we're going to want to consider when we talk about building our get data function. One of those things might be that we want to retrieve from different exchanges as time goes on. Today we're talking about Binance. I've done series on MetaTrader. I'll probably do one on alpaca.trade. I really want a way to adhere to those don't repeat yourself or dry principles of making this as expandable as possible so that I only have to change code in one place. Now, RSI strategy is absolutely no different. We want to be able to use that on any kind of symbol, any kind of data that we might want to pass it. Excuse me. So what we're going to do is we're going to go to our helper underscore functions.py. And if you don't have it, go ahead and create that now. And then in the bottom of that file, we're going to include a function called get underscore data. And you would have seen as I was scrolling around, I've got one there for lot size calculations. And we'll talk about that a little bit later, which is quite handy if you're using foreign exchange. So the get data function receives three pieces of information. First of all, it needs to know what symbol to go and retrieve the data. Then it needs to know what time frame we're going to use to get that data, and then we want to know what exchange we're going to be getting that data from. Now, in a previous episode of this particular series, I talked a little bit around the time frame and how every exchange seems to have its own little way of like formatting how it wants data. So if you talk about MetaTrader, if you're a 1 minute time frame, you use a capital M1. If you talk about Binance, you're using a one little and followed by a lowercase m. And so basically in the library that's applicable to whatever kind of exchange we're querying, we always make sure we normalize those values, meaning that when we use the get data function, we're only ever using one value or one sort of format to get that data. And ultimately, we want this function to return a data frame of the information. The first thing we're going to do is to check that the exchange that we're using is supported. And for this particular series, we're just going to be covering Binance. So we say if exchange is equal to Binance, we'll do something in a moment. Otherwise, throw an error. So exchange is not supported. Okay, and you can add other exchanges there as you need. Now let's fill out this if exchange section. Now we have previously already figured out how to get those candlesticks from Binance. So this is as simple as importing our binance_lib.py file and adding it below. Now, if you haven't followed that episode, I've linked it in the description so that you can go back and review it. Okay, and we're going to use our get_candlesticks function. Then we just pass the value, so we've got symbol equals symbol, time frame equals time frame, and we'll just go with the default limit of 1,000. Now that should be actually number of candles, so I'll quickly update that. Like I said, Copilot has a few random errors that it throws. It can be at times very opinionated about how it thinks your code should be done. And ultimately, we want to return that data back to the user, or back to the calling function. Right, now that we've got our helper function sorted, let's go back to our main strategy function and start to update it. Now, as we're heading back there, as I said, this episode really wants to expand about how you go about building your own strategy, because I've had a lot of questions about it from listeners, and I really appreciate that. So, as you can probably observe, when we first created this function, about the main strategy function, we only included a couple of different pieces of information. So we only had the data frame, overbought and oversold levels. But if we want to include this helper function, I'm sure you've observed that we need to include now some options for including a symbol and a time frame. So we're going to add those to our RSI overbought oversold strategy. Okay, so now you can see we've updated, so our data frame, all of them are set to a default value of none. And so now we need to include an error check. Okay, so basically what we want to have is an error that says if data frame is equal to none, we should have a symbol and a time frame value. If all of those remain none, then we've got an error and that needs to be updated. Now, why this might be exciting for you is that potentially once we've got the RSI thing going and we've figured out how to integrate our back testing, you might be able to go through every single currency pair that exists on Binance and test it. Not promising that that's what we're going to cover in this series, because we're not, but you potentially could expand this function to go ahead and do that. Okay, and there's the error message. Now we can go back to our helper function .get data function, and we can update it and pass it the symbol, time frame, and exchange is equal to Binance functions. Pretty cool. Now what we want to do is go ahead and calculate our indicators on the data that we've just retrieved. And we're going to use the same process here. So what we're going to do here is we're going to build this calc underscore indicators function and then come back and update our main strategy function. So the purpose of the calc indicators function is to calculate whatever indicators are needed for a given strategy. And this can sometimes be really simple. Like here, we're just using the RSI, but it could also become quite complicated if you're looking at, one that takes multiple types of strategies, and, each strategy is kind of like confirming the previous ones. Like, you can really make this particular calc underscore indicators function really, really complicated. And that's why it's really, really handy to have it separated so it doesn't kind of mess up the rest of your code. Certainly when I'm building custom trading bots for people, I always follow this approach because it really does make it easy to modify the strategy as we do back testing together. But ultimately, this will really make your life a lot easier. So what do we need initially for this calc underscore indicators? Well, initially, if we're just going with a pure strategy that we don't want to be able to modify, all we really need is the data frame in this particular instance. All we're going to be doing is calculating an RSI. Okay, so we need to import our indicator lib. Okay, so we use our indicator lib dot underscore calc underscore RSI, which we did in the previous episode. Then we pass it our data frame. However, as you probably already realized, but I'll cover it now, the RSI can actually be modified by its period, or RSI underscore period. And that can change how the RSI works. And it'll be pretty interesting, I think, while we're going through our Binance data, particularly because the crypto world is still quite new. Might be really interesting to have a look at if changing the RSI period changes the outcome. So let's do that. Okay, double checking our indicator supports it, which it does. So we go back here, get rid of the RSI column name is equal to RSI for now because we're not looking to display the data. And then we want to add that to our function. To finish off part one of our strategy builder, let's go ahead and add that RSI period back into our main strategy so that we can use it as a variable to modify and check against whatever data we happen to be using. To do that, head back over to our main strategy function and add that in as a variable to calculate. Now, I've added it in this position because I like to just keep all of the RSI things together, but you can really just add it in any order that you want. Okay, and then finally, we just want to update this particular strategy with our calc indicators thing, and that's it. In the next episode, then, we'll start to pull this all together.